This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello, I'm in a state of shock. No, it's not the fact that Woman's Hour's Grant Dam is now a Dame of the British Empire. I wonder, should I curtsy when I see Dame Jenny? Anyway, my shocked state is not the result of the Queen's Birthdays honour list and the fact that a knighthood continues to elude me. No, it's the almost unprecedented criticism of Desert Island Discs, presented by another golden voice, Dame Kirsty, as she will surely become. 25,000 of you entered your choices for the People's Desert Island Discs. So how come we only heard from a handful in last weekend's special programme?
I didn't really see the point in the guests in the studio because we hear them on things so often, and I felt it was a rather missed opportunity.
And as Radio 3 commits itself to live concerts every weekday night, I investigate the perils of going live.
All sorts of things happen. I remember once when I was a producer, we were absolutely ready to go and it was all perfectly sorted out, and the conductor suddenly announced that no, he was going to the toilet. And he disappeared for quite a while.
I take a listener behind the scenes at one of Radio 3's live orchestral broadcasts. But first, what should you expect from Radio 4's consumer programme You and Yours? Well, not an extended plug for Krispy Kreme donuts, which is what several listeners thought happened on Monday, courtesy of Julian Warwicker. Here's the presenter talking to Rob Hunt, the managing director of the donut producing company.
And how many flavours, how many varieties do you have in total?
At any point in time, we'll sell 16 different varieties. There's about 10 that are constant, and we sell them all the year round, and then we kind of bring in new seasonal variations during the course of the year. So at the moment, we've just launched our summer donut range, and that includes my personal favourite at the moment, which is a new cheesecake donut, which is just gorgeous.
Maybe gorgeous if you're Homer Simpson, but not if you are the following.
My name's Deborah Hackett, and I wanted to know why You and Yours donated all that time for what was essentially a free advertisement and wonderful promotional opportunity for the Crispy Whatever Donut Company. Did the managing director of the donut company send in a press release? I can't think how else they would have found out about them.
My name's Kathleen O'Neill. One of the reasons I love BBC Radio is it's not trying to sell me a product or a service. Please, Radio 4, stick to education and entertainment. Product placement is not your remit.
My name's Anne Marshall-Lee from Manchester. I was really angry. It was like the interviewer was providing opportunities for the representative of the company to publicise their product. And then there was a last-minute part of it, was about 2 minutes, where it was talking about health. But by that time I was so angry I just had to go and write my complaint.
My name's Claire Jackson. I seriously think that they might have been given a whole tray of them, passed them around the office, and just fell for it.
I put your concerns to the editor of You and Yours, Andrew Smith, and asked him why he thought such a piece was right for the programme.
Well, what we thought was that Krispy Kreme are a company that are expanding in Britain fairly rapidly, and we felt that it was slightly counterintuitive. We thought that when they first arrived in Britain in 2003 and then started to expand, everyone was so sceptical that they would last. And, you know, they have done, and they are now becoming more prevalent.
Where did you first hear about this story?
There was stories in the newspapers about the expansion of Krispy Kreme. There was a particular piece in The Guardian, I remember, and we felt that we should do our own piece. They didn't approach us; we approached them.
So they're a business success story, but you're not in business. You're about You and Yours. And Deborah Hackett, for example, says that the chief executive took full advantage of the BBC's generosity, and she says naivety. And it's true. For the first 3 minutes, for example, he told us all about his marketing campaign, how wonderfully successful it was, how Harrods were helping him out. For the next 3 minutes, next third, he took us round what a wonderful production process it was. It was only in the last third that any health questions were raised.
I don't agree it was an advertisement at all, although I know that some people did use that phrase. I think there is a misunderstanding about consumer programmes. I think consumer programmes have to move with the times, and I don't think that every piece has to be devoted to pulling apart a company, finding things wrong with it. That said, the hard questions, as you say, were put.
At the very end, in the last third. But
yes.
I mean, in terms of the first 6 minutes, it's essentially there wasn't a critical question, and it was something which some of our listeners suggest the PR company, if there was one representing the company, would have been delighted with.
Let me put a question to you, Roger. What are Krispy Kreme doing wrong?
It's not for me to judge, but in the view of our audience, what you're doing wrong is not critically examining something which is a controversial or at the heart of a controversial debate about the nature of fat, about the nature of nutrition and diet.
Well, I think if you look at our track record over the years, you'll find that we've been very good on obesity, nutrition, fast food, healthy diet, all that kind of thing. I think you have to take our coverage of this in context. I think that we did ask questions about the calorific content. We asked about whether it was healthy. We asked whether they were encouraging people to eat more.
And prefaced by Julian Warwicker saying, I don't want to get all pious about this, we all like a treat. People buy cigarettes, people buy whiskey, what else? But would you devote as much time on your programme to those things and have a presenter say, well, I don't want to get all pious about this, we all like a treat?
We don't necessarily have to accept a default position where someone a company that is doing well in business, that we have to find a means of attacking them.
Questioning them closely.
They were questioned closely, but the fast food issue, the obesity issue, we have done those stories. Any You and Yours listener will be fully aware of those stories. We get this when we do individual businesses, and we do quite often get complaints. We've done Best Buy, the electrical chain, we've done John Lewis, we've done Greggs the Bakers. These are all industry shops, retailers, if you like, who are thriving. Whenever we've done this, people seem to associate what we've done with advertising. I think our listeners are more savvy than that. I think that people want information about retailers, and I think they got it here, and I think that they've got it in our other pieces. We have to take a grown-up attitude to this and treat our listeners as though they have intelligence. We know, everyone knows.
That's a dangerous statement. You're suggesting that all of these listeners who have written to us, some feel really let down by you, and you're suggesting they're not intelligent?
No, I didn't say that at all. I'm saying...
Well, you say you trust to their intelligence, and their intelligence response is to say, this is the first two-thirds of this item was unchallenged promotion for the product.
I don't accept that it was unchallenged promotion, but what I would say is that people are interested in information about products as well as the controversies about products. And I think people know the debate. I think people know that if you lived on Krispy Kreme donuts, you would probably get fat. And I'm not belittling the complaints. I think that we perhaps haven't explained that this change, if you like, in approach to some of our pieces. And, maybe there is a case for saying that we should explain more. And, I'm welcoming this chance to actually explain that we do have an attitude to some stories, which is, slightly more information gathering rather than retreading issues.
Andrew Smith. And I'm told there were definitely no freebie donuts for the You and Yours team. I certainly wasn't offered one. I would, of course, have refused it. Well, at first, anyway. Now, should the BBC's classical music station be renamed Radio 3 Live? In what it calls an unprecedented initiative, the network is now presenting a live broadcast every weekday evening in Performance on 3. Is this just a publicity stunt, or is the listener gaining something special from listening to a work as it is being performed? Sarah Spilsbury belongs to the Friends of Radio 3, an independent group of about 500 Radio 3 listeners who like to tell the station what they think of it from time to time. Overall, Sarah is a fan of the new live initiative, but she's got a few reservations as well.
We wondered how viable are the 5 nights a week live concerts at a time of BBC Cuts, 5 outside broadcasts with everything having to be set up each night. And there's a suspicion, has this been for a splurge of publicity? And we'll drop back to maybe 1 live concert a week before too long.
Do you think there is something worth listening to every night of the week? Have you worried about that?
Well, the one good thing about it is that obviously there's a variety of different types of concert. There's orchestral, there's chamber music, there are choral works. So one would imagine there is quite a lot going on. But nevertheless, there are times of year like the summer when there's more going on. And during the autumn and winter, perhaps they fall back onto standard repertoire. And I wonder whether there are drawbacks to being committed to a live concert every night.
And you're worried that if there's a very good concert, say, on a Tuesday, it won't get covered, though it deserves to be, because there's perhaps an even better one on a Tuesday as well, but nothing on a Wednesday.
It could be something like that, yes. And it's probably the wrong time to mention this, but there probably wouldn't be a huge outcry if an excellent pre-recorded concert was included from time to time.
Sarah Spilsbury. Chris Newman is another Radio 3 Live fan. I met him and Edward Blakeman, the editor of Radio 3 Live in Concert, outside Shoreditch Church in East London, where Purcell's semi-opera, King Arthur, was about to be performed live by the English Concert and I Fagiolini. We stood at the back of the church, eavesdropping on the final rehearsals. And I asked Chris, what was so special about live music anyway?
The feeling that it's going on now, those air molecules that are moving around and making the sound in our ears, that sound is being made at almost the same moment, perhaps 75 miles away in London, or it could be in Edinburgh, or it could be in Berlin or somewhere.
Well, you're a part of the performance,
I
you're
feel
not separate
part
from
of
it.
I feel emotionally involved in it. It's an excitement, it sends a frisson through you that I think is very, very moving.
So, what about the sound? What are the particular advantages of this church that you've got in terms of sound?
Well, the sound is wonderful, mainly because the ceiling is so high. I think if you want any sort of acoustic, you want a warmth to the acoustic,
yes.
Don't you think?
I think so, yes. I mean, I can hear my voice coming back, and I'm not shouting at the moment.
The thing that surprises me is you haven't got microphones everywhere.
I mean, the mics that you can see that are slung in the air, the stereo mics looking down at the stage, are very much the basis of the sound that you hear. And those are supplemented by other microphones on the stage, and the rest is the alchemy that goes on back in the outside broadcast van.
Well, I was going to say what the audience hears here in the church is not necessarily what the audience at home hears, because, gosh, you're fading up and down mics and so on. But so can we go outside to the radio scanner and to see what magic you work there?
OK, let's do that.
Chris, if you'd like to go behind. Chris, have you ever been in one of these?
No, I've never been in one. I've seen them many times standing outside the Royal Albert Hall when I go to the proms. I thought I was going to go into a large caravan.
Oh, Doctor Who's telephone box, yes?
Yes,
it's quite close to that,
like a
isn't it?
TARDIS when you get inside.
What's the function of this outside broadcast van? What do you actually do here?
This is the point where it all comes together, because each of the individual microphones that you can see in the church will feed out by cables to this van. The sound then travels from here by ISDN lines to Broadcasting House, and then it goes on out on the usual broadcasting chain.
Now, Chris, you're slightly suspicious about this, the volume of the sound. What's your particular concern?
I think with the large orchestral works, the volume can go shooting down when it gets to a big climax.
What, you think they're overcautious?
Overcautious, yes.
Is that true? Do you reduce the volume of a particular loud piece, so you sort of scared you go off the dial or something?
Well, the other thing you have to remember is that working within the bandwidth of radio, it isn't as wide as CDs.
Yes.
You can't get as quiet, you can't get as loud. I'd like to think we don't go shooting down, but there are some compromises to be made about how quiet something can be and how loud something can be.
And do you pray as it breaks down?
We prayed last week when we needed to use a satellite dish, because that's the alternative means of getting the signal back to Broadcasting House. And we were in a very tight little area of the City of London where you couldn't actually see the sky terribly easily.
So you've got to be in line of sight.
You've got to be in line of sight.
If you can't see the satellite, you can't get a signal.
You've got to be line of sight. And the outside broadcast engineers were very, very clever and took another van just round the corner, got line of sight, connected it up with this van, and there we are, we had the concert.
That's sort of like an in-Oxford football, yes? Well, we've now retreated to an office at the top of the building. I've got some questions here from Sarah from the Friends of Radio 3, and she wants to know, for a start, whether these live concerts do cost more.
It's about the same, and the challenge is that we're working with the same budget and it's my job to make it work within the budget.
But it's not really unprecedented, is it? Some of our listeners say, well, hold on a minute, we used to have far more live concerts, well, until about 4 years ago.
We've never had exclusively live Monday to Friday, virtually every week a year.
Is there really something worth listening to every night of the week? Isn't there bound to be some duplication?
There is an extraordinary richness of musical activity in the UK, and I'm confident that we can give you a good concert to listen to Monday to Friday most weeks of the year. We have invented a sort of safety valve, because there's now a Sunday concert, and that will be mainly one of the other things during the previous week that we would really like to have done and done live. We've got a Sunday concert, we can catch up on it.
And do you notice that when you're doing something live, people are a bit more on edge? Do you find it more nerve-wracking?
Oh, absolutely. All sorts of things that happen. I remember once when I was a producer, we were absolutely ready to go and it was all perfectly sorted out, and the conductor suddenly announced that no, he was going to the toilet. And he disappeared for quite a while. So that was a tricky one, and we had to find a way to carry on doing the broadcast until he came and actually started to conduct the orchestra.
As we were leaving, we bumped into Robert Hollingworth, the concert's director, who explained why the rough and ready riskiness of a live performance is so well suited to early music in particular.
Live gives you something that a CD in general doesn't get, and it may be slightly unpolished as a result because people are taking risks. The whole problem with early music is you don't have authentic audiences listening to it. We need time.
Well, they're too reverential, do you think?
Yes, I mean, early 17th century, people take their dogs in. So Thomas Weelkes, wasn't it? Weelkes was once fined, but not sacked, for urinating on the Dean during evensong, which is quite good, but from the organ loft. Now that's an Olympic sport.
Thanks very much. Director Robert Hollingworth, and don't try that at home. Thanks also to listener Chris Newman and Edward Blakeman, editor of Radio 3 Live in Concert. Now, as you're well aware, my accountant and I love to know what you think about anything you've heard on any BBC radio station, good or bad. So you can write to feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX, or you can leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. Or you can email feedback@bbc.co.uk. All those details are on our website. Ben West emailed to say he's delighted that the Friday Play is back on the air. He also loves science programmes like Material World and Frontiers, and especially The Infinite Monkey Cage, although he wishes it was on a bit later. He's only 12, but he doesn't get home from school in time. Next week on Feedback, we're going to be talking about radio for children. There's precious little of it on air anymore. For example, Radio 4 Extra has just taken most of its children's programmes off the air and put them online instead. Yet we also heard that over 30,000 children sent in stories in a competition run by the Chris Evans Show on Radio 2. I'll be asking what's the future for children's radio on the BBC, indeed, whether there is one. And I'd love to know what other questions you would like answered. Now, as you heard on last week's Feedback, Radio 4 Extra and Radio 2 are among the BBC radio stations that have been taken off Freeview in Scotland during the evenings to make room for the Gaelic TV station, BBC Alpa. Lots of you have been in touch to say how dismayed you are at the decision. For many of you, and not just those living in remote locations, listening via the TV is the only way to get what you think is a decent reception. Last week, Alex Pride, the BBC's Director of Distribution, said that after a widespread consultation undertaken by the BBC Trust, it was decided to drop Radios 1, 2, 3 and 4 and BBC Radio Scotland from Freeview in the evenings. But she said it was not of major concern because in most cases you'd still be able to listen via DAB or FM. Oh, no, we can't, says Elizabeth Glass among many others.
We live in a town about 20 miles east of Edinburgh and have got 2 DAB radios in the household, but we are unable to get Radio Scotland. I keep going on about this reception, but it is amazing that living 20 miles out of the capital city, we can't get Radio Scotland.
I'm Hazel Morris and I live on the Isle of Mull. I bought a Freeview box especially to listen to Radio 4 because the off-air reception was so poor I definitely can't get stereo, and I can only get mono sometimes.
My name's Fiona Gill. I live halfway between Dundee and Aberdeen, so not exactly remote and not a Gaelic-speaking area. There was no warning, consultation or announcements about the changes that I was aware of. So basically I would appreciate if the BBC would reverse the decision or provide me with some means of listening to my favourite radio shows on Radio 4 and Radio 2.
And we also had emails from listeners in Dumbarton, Banffshire, Galashiels, Orkney, the Isle of Skye and Oban. Jim Lassurf from Fife was amongst a number of you who challenged the results of that BBC Trust consultation. In their published report, the Trust said it placed trails for the consultation across all of the BBC services in Scotland. There were 18 slots on BBC One and BBC Two, and 41 across BBC Radio Scotland, and publicity in Scottish newspapers. But if Radio 4 is your station, you almost certainly wouldn't have had a clue. Here's Jim's keen interpretation of those figures.
If you look at the summary of the consultation, it shows that about 43% of responders were Gaelic speakers or serious learners of the language. This is vastly disproportionate for the Scottish population. If we're generous and assume that 2% are speakers or serious learners, then there's a clear bias in the responses, where they're overrepresented by more than a factor of 20.
We asked the BBC Trust what they thought of Jim's point.
This was clearly an emotive issue on both sides of the argument and prompted many responses from each point of view. The Trust's decision was not based solely on public consultation. We also undertook specific audience research and rigorous data analysis, and we're confident that we have considered all the relevant issues. We are taking steps to minimise the impact on radio users, and we're investing more in extending DAB coverage.
The BBC Trust. Still, one feedback listener thinks it's all a lot of fuss about nothing.
My name's Michael Doherty and I'm phoning from Glasgow. This is the only outlet for our language on television in the world. And to try and justify the loss of some radio programmes for a few hours was more important than that was basically ridiculous. This is the only country, Scotland, that speaks Gaelic. We deserve this channel. You can listen to Freeview Radio, I think 17 hours a day.
Michael Doherty. I didn't get round to submitting my list of 8 Paul Simon records to Desert Island Discs, but more than 25,000 listeners sent their Dream 8-some to Dame Kirsty. In all, nearly 250,000 music suggestions were received for consideration as part of the People's Desert Island Discs. Many of you enjoyed the resulting 90-minute live special broadcast last Saturday. Unsurprisingly, the Beatles, Beethoven and Bob Dylan were among your most popular choices. Kirsty Young was joined by composer Howard Goodall, critic Miranda Sawyer and pop doyen Paul Gambaccini to assess the public's most popular choices. Most listeners seem to have thought it was a great programme, but some of you got in touch to say you'd wish you'd heard a little bit less of the celebs and a bit more of the listeners.
I was very disappointed that so much of the time was taken up with celebrities saying what their choices were, and particularly Paul Gambaccini, who we hear on other programmes. It almost seemed like his show.
I spent some time deciding on the artists I would have wanted to perform my classical choices, and then found there was no opportunity to enter them. You would not have expected us to choose a popular song, i.e. Rock Around the Clock, without specifying Bill Haley and his Comets. Why treat classical music differently?
I thought the great strength of the programme was hearing the anecdotes from members of the public saying why more obscure pieces of music had some meaning for them, and I felt it was a rather missed opportunity.
Did it not occur to you to pick out some listeners' top 8s and play them over, say, half an hour in a series of programmes? That at least would be useful and worth listening to.
Thank you to Sandy Beecher, Jill Pickup, Angela Burrows and Colin McLaughlin. Alice Feinstein is the editor of Desert Island Discs. It was her team which waded through those thousands of submissions. I asked her why they'd decided to hear more from the famous experts than from listeners.
I'm not sure we went down the celebrity route. I mean, it's a difficult balance to strike, and what we wanted to do, we said right at the outset that we held our hand up. So we said, we've had so many submissions, more than 80,000 individual tracks were nominated, and we knew that we could only ever scratch the surface. So what we thought was we would focus on the top 8 listener tracks. And the reason we invited Howard Goodall, Paul Gambaccini and Miranda Sawyer into the studio was that we felt it was important to enhance those choices by a bit of context and information. And I know some of our listeners were very pleased. They've said, this programme made perfect listening. The Lark Ascending had a new resonance. Now I know where, when and why it was written. Somebody else emailed us to say, great input from the guests, interesting musical choices and strangely heartwarming. So we thought putting a little bit of context around the listener choices was important.
But what about the listeners themselves? How many did we actually hear from? Because I listened to the whole programme and it was a very small number, wasn't it?
We had 6 listener stories behind their personal top 8. So that was Barbara, who chose Prince Buster, John, who chose ABBA to remind him of his daughter. We had Emma and her father John talking about Judith's song. Maurice Hopper talked to us about how he had done the Desert Island Disc experiment and taken 8 tracks with him when he went away. Jeremy Jones spoke to us about the Beatles, and Peter Bowman on the South African national anthem. Now, those were just the people who spoke to us. We also included lots of listener comments through emails, tweets. We invited people to take part. Even throughout the show, we got them to tell us which part of Comfortably Numb they wanted us to play. So we really did try and include as much as possible.
Well, can I put some questions about the data that you did collect? And one criticism for Sandy Beaches, who said, why wasn't it possible to specify which artist for the classical pieces? In other words, the point she makes is she could nominate Elgar's Cello Concerto. She couldn't say who she wanted to play it. On the air, she got Julian Lloyd Webber. She wanted the Jacqueline du Pré.
We asked people to tell us the artist and the title, and we didn't want performers in the artist field, and that was because if people had told us performers, we might have had Jacqueline du Pré, Yo-Yo Ma, Julian Lloyd Webber, any number of performers, and that might have meant that in the final analysis, that particular piece of music would not have made it into the top 8 or even, the top 100. But I do take on board that that was a difficult choice and would have been frustrating for people. We know it was. They've contacted us to say so. We hope that by putting the comments box, we gave people the opportunity to express something about their choices.
Now, what happens to all this valuable, maybe invaluable data? A couple of our listeners, for example, want to see more of those results. They want the top 100.
Yes,
can they find that?
They can't find it at the moment because we're still working on it. All we've done is verify the top 8, but we're working to verify as much as we can. But I just want to say we're talking to Gwyneth Williams, who's controller of Radio 4, about what we can do with this material, because there's so much there. We really do think there's plenty more that we can do.
Alice Feinstein, I've just amended my list of 8 records, just in case Dame Kirsty calls. 7, not 8, Paul Simons now, and 1 new entry, Mary Chapin Carpenter. Dream on. Goodbye.
I remember once when I was a producer, we were absolutely ready to go and it was all perfectly sorted out, and the conductor suddenly announced that no, he was going to the toilet. And he disappeared for quite a while.
I take a listener behind the scenes at one of Radio 3's live orchestral broadcasts. But first, what should you expect from Radio 4's consumer programme, You and Yours? Well, not an extended plug for Krispy Kreme donuts, which is what several listeners thought happened on Monday, courtesy of Julian Warwicker. Here's the presenter talking to Rob Hunt, the managing director of the donut producing company.
A free advertisement and wonderful promotional opportunity for the Crispy Whatever Donut Company. Did the managing director of the donut company send in a press release? I can't think how else they would have found out about them.
My name's Kathleen O'Neill. One of the reasons I love BBC Radio is it's not trying to sell me a product or a service. Please, Radio 4, stick to education and entertainment. Product placement is not your remit.
My name's Anne Marshall-Lee from Manchester. I was really angry. It was
and Kirsty, as she will surely become. 25,000 of you entered your choices for the People's Desert Island Discs. So how come we only heard from a handful in last weekend's special programme?
I didn't really see the point in the guests in the studio because we hear them on things so often, and I felt it was a rather missed opportunity.
And as Radio 3 commits itself to live concerts every weekday night, I investigate the perils of going live.
All sorts of things have happened.
And how many flavours, how many varieties do you have in total?
At any point in time, we'll sell 16 different varieties. There's about 10 that are constant, and we sell them all the year round, and then we kind of bring in new seasonal variations during the course of the year. So at the moment, we've just launched our summer donut range, and that includes my personal favourite at the moment, which is a new cheesecake donut, which is just gorgeous.
Maybe gorgeous if you're Homer Simpson, but not if you are the following.
My name's Deborah Hackett, and I wanted to know why you and yours donated all that time for what was essentially...
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello, I'm in a state of shock. No, it's not the fact that Woman's Hour's Grant Dam is now a Dame of the British Empire. I wonder, should I curtsy when I see Dame Jenny? Anyway, my shocked state is not the result of the Queen's Birthday's honour list and the fact that a knighthood continues to elude me. No, it's the almost unprecedented criticism of Desert Island Discs, presented by another golden voice, Dame